Thanks, Phil. I'd like to thank the group for having me here tonight. My name is Kat V. I'm from Philly, and I am a recovered alcoholic. My sobriety date is August 20th, 2017. I have a home group. It is the Firing Line Big Book group. We meet every Monday night at 6 p.m. Eastern time on Zoom. We have a different leader come each Monday to pick up the reading wherever we left off the week before. We read line by line through the Big Book, from the title page right through the first 164 plus Dr. Bob's Nightmare, and then we start back over again, and that's been going since the pandemic hit. This group did not exist prior to the pandemic, but we got a nice little following, and now some core home group members, and an in-person meeting sprung out of this that meets on Tuesday nights in Baltimore, which I don't get to often because I'm in Philadelphia. But yeah, they're both great little groups. I have a sponsor. This woman knows she's my sponsor. She shared her experience with the 12 steps as outlined in the Big Book with me so that I could have my own experience and form a relationship with God. I have the honor and the privilege of sponsoring other women when asked to do so, or when I make an approach, which is just the coolest thing, and I'm in service in my home group, and I'm in service, in AA. It's one of my favorite things to do, being in service and working one-on-one with another alcoholic, which is really wild because in August of 2017, I was not looking to stop drinking for all and for good, let alone to get a sponsor or do steps or get a home group or sponsor other women or be helpful and useful. I wasn't looking to quit drinking alcohol forever. I was only searching for a way out. That was it. And series of events occurred, and I believe the spirit of the universe intervened and kind of directed me back into the rooms of AA, which is exactly where I needed to be, but also directed me back into a meeting where my path crossed with a woman who had found a solution in these steps and in this book. It wasn't my first experience in Alcoholics Anonymous. I had been in and out of the rooms like 20 years prior, but I'd never, no one had ever approached me with the book. I didn't even know the steps existed outside of being hung on the wall in meetings. I had no idea that there was a program beyond just making meetings and fellowshipping before and after. And therefore I didn't understand. At first I didn't understand why AA wasn't working for me. And then I just thought that I was just so sick and so broken and so different that it couldn't or wouldn't work for me. I didn't understand that I wasn't doing AA. I wasn't doing anything except, showing up and sitting my butt in a chair, for an hour every day. So let's see. I don't remember my first drink. What I even going back a little bit before that, what I remember growing up when I was little was being absolutely full of fear. The part in the book and how it works, where it talks about being driven by 100 forms of fear. When I was a really little girl, like even before anything external had happened around me or to me, that would have been a reasonable reason to cause me to be full of fear. I recall being a little girl and being full of fear. Like that was my default state. That was just my natural state, was being full of fear. And I was painfully and acutely aware that other people didn't exist in this fearful state, whether it was my younger siblings, my two younger sisters, which I come to find out, years later, because they are both sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous as well. They were full of fear. They just hid it in ways different than I did. It didn't seem like, the kids I went to school with were full of fear, other adults that I knew or family members. I just had this awareness that there was something different about the way that I felt and existed in life. And it was terrifying. Fear dictated every single thing in my life. It controlled my thoughts and my emotions. It controlled what I would say or not say more often than not, because I was so full of fear. It was like every morning I would wake up and fear would be, behind the wheel in a car, and I would like get into either the driver's seat, or sometimes it felt like I was in the back seat, or I was totally powerless, and fear would just kind of like, direct and guide everything that would go on throughout the day. Um, and it was a lot, like it was a lot. And then things started to happen in life that would give cause for me to be full of fear, or cause for me to be distrustful of people, to be hurt, to be scared, to be wanting to seek escape. um, and uh, and I remember having a deep desire to escape from my physical reality, the surroundings, my home life, from kids teasing me and torturing me and picking on me and bullying me at school, but also to escape from all this internal stuff, this incessant, nonstop internal dialogue inside my little, whatever 12-year-old head, where it was just chatter all the time that wouldn't slow down, wouldn't calm down, wouldn't turn down the volume. Um, and just this unease that I felt internally in my heart, in my soul, I don't even know what you want to call it, that I felt here and that I felt in the pit of my stomach pretty much constantly. So there was this desire to escape those things. So whenever alcohol first got introduced, which I think was at a normal sort of time for a kid in high school, sometime in either the first or second year of my high school days, I think is when I first had a drink. I don't remember much about it. What I can recall, especially looking back, is from the very first time I drank alcohol, and all the subsequent times. I had little to no control over myself once I started drinking. But at the time, it made sense to me that I was young. This is the first time I've ever drank, let alone gotten drunk. I shouldn't know how to stay in control. And the whole point wasn't to stay in control. It was to drink and get drunk and have fun. And that's what I did, or at least that's what I thought I did. And I thought that that was normal. Um, and Anytime I would have access to alcohol, I would indulge. As a teenager, I didn't have access to alcohol as often as I would have liked. But when it was there, I drank and I got wasted, and I would black out or pass out or throw up in the corner. Um, and what I recall, moving on from high school to when I graduated, um, I started waiting tables and bartending and working in nightclubs. So all of a sudden, I'm a 17, 18-year-old kid who's not legally allowed to drink alcohol, but who's able to serve it to other people, and, therefore has access to it. Um, and at first it just looked like a shift drink after work, and then going out after work with some other of my colleagues, coworkers, and drinking. And then it, turned into, drinking before my shift would end, and, going out after, and then going out to after parties or after hours clubs. And then it turned into, drinking almost as soon as I would start my shift behind the bar, going out to after parties, drinking till, all hours of the morning. And what I found was that I was unable to control the amount of alcohol how much I would start, or once I started drinking, I was unable to control the amount that I would take. Right. And the reason this was presenting a problem for me is I'm 18 years old. Legally, I'm not allowed in any of the places that are serving me alcohol. But because I work on South Street, because I work at this nightclub, on Spring Garden Street, all these other bars and nightclubs know that I'm an employee at these places, and therefore they let me in without getting carded. They serve me drinks without, showing ID. So I'm drinking at these places underage. It's the only way I'm able to have access to alcohol. I can't even go into the liquor store to buy it for myself legally yet. And every time I start to drink, I get drunk too fast. And I just way overshoot the mark. At least that's what I thought it was in my head. And No matter how hard I would try and put my mind to committing to not drinking so much so quickly so early in the night, without fail, every time I would start, I'm passed out at like 9:30. On nights where I didn't have to tend bar, I'm at the club and it's 9:30, like the dance floor isn't even packed, and I'm slumped over in the corner of the bar passed out, and I'm underage. And so what was happening is, I was aware that this was this was putting into jeopardy my ability to have this access to alcohol by getting so drunk so quick, so often, everywhere I went, and not being able to stay in control. At the time, so this was the late 90s, at the time, everywhere I worked, everyone I worked with, not just like the coworkers and the bar managers, but the people who owned these places. Everyone seemed to drink and do the Goodfellas form of alcohol to stay up, right? That was just normal. That's what everyone was doing. Even the people who employed me. So when that was introduced, it didn't seem like anything that was, you know, out of the ordinary. It was just seemed normal life for working in the service industry. And what that other form of alcohol allowed me to do is it allowed me to not pass out so quickly, not black out so often, not end up in the corner vomiting at 9:30 p.m. So that became my routine for a while. And I thought that that was working pretty well. And at some point, someone gave me a bag of something that I thought was going to keep me up, and it brought me way, way down. And I ended up becoming addicted to the train spotting form of alcohol. And the goal was not to become addicted to that. The first thought when I tried some of this stuff, even though when it was given to me, I thought it was something that was going to keep me up so I could drink more alcohol. When I tried this and I realized what it was, my first thought was, because of the sense of ease and comfort that it gave me immediately, my first thought was, if I start doing a little bit of this, I won't have to drink as much, or as I found out, at all. And my next experiment, right, trying to control my drinking, was doing this other stuff. And that experiment failed miserably, almost immediately. I was strung out on this other form of alcohol. I felt so embarrassed and full of shame. I was hanging out with a crowd of people. Some of them might have been alcoholic drinkers. I don't know. I think the most of them were binge drinkers, heavy drinkers, problem drinkers. Some of them were partying with other stuff. But not many of my friends were doing this, this other form of alcohol. And so I was hiding it and doing it in secret. And it took me downhill, down this downward spiral really, really quickly. And I wanted help, but I didn't know how to ask for it. I was too embarrassed. I felt that I'd gotten myself into this mess, and I didn't know how to get myself out. But anyway, I eventually reached out and crawled back to my parents, and they put me into a detox. And after the physical detox, I stayed for inpatient treatment. And I don't remember hearing much in the way of, this is what you suffer from in treatment. What I heard was, once you get discharged, you can't do this again. You can't pick this stuff up again, or you'll end up right back here, which is true. But I didn't hear much in the way of an explanation of the disease of alcoholism and addiction. And after I, stayed for inpatient, I went to intensive outpatient. I went to rehab after work. I was directed to go to a different fellowship, which I started off in, and go to 90 meetings in 90 days. At some point along the way, going to this different fellowship, someone saw me after a meeting and saw that I was still in like a lot of pain, right? And they suggested that I check out Alcoholics Anonymous. And I remember laughing out loud. I was like, I'm not an alcoholic. Why would I go to AA? Like, no one was talking to me about my drinking. No one, not my parents, not my friends, not anyone. They were all just so concerned of this other form that I was doing. And the person said, if you check out AA, you might hear something in the way of a solution. You might find some people with a little bit more, continuous sobriety who can, share the solution with you if you're interested. It might be easier to listen to people talk about their drinking than talking about getting high. And it didn't make much sense to me, but I took this person's suggestion. I started going to AA meetings instead. And thank God, because what I experienced in that other fellowship was a lot of people talking about wanting to get high. We're talking about getting high. And I don't remember hearing much in the way of a solution. When I went to the rooms of AA, right? There was something different, and I couldn't put my finger on it. But I stuck around and I kept going to meetings. the problem that I encountered, unlike when I wandered back into AA in 2017, is that, like I said, no one approached me with a book. I don't remember, this is so embarrassing. I didn't even know that this was the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. The meetings that I was going to in like 1999 and 2000, most of the meeting rooms, if there was a chairperson's table up front, they would have this book on a little book stand displayed like this, right? No one ever opened it. I didn't know the directions and the steps were in here. You told me that this wasn't a religious program, but I didn't believe you. There was God all over the steps on the wall. You guys would say the Lord's Prayer. I was convinced like this is some cult or this is some like sneaky way to get me to believe in God with a capital G. And when I heard you guys talk about the big book, I thought you were talking about the good book, meaning the Bible. And I thought that this book on the tables was the Bible. So I thought this was a whole big crock of S, right? And but the kinds of meetings I was going to, like, I don't even think there were big book meetings in the area that I was going to. And you know, when I was talking one-on-one with women after the meeting, they would all sort of flock and surround me and scribble down their phone numbers and tell me to call and say, meeting makers make it, just don't drink and make a meeting, think, 90 and 90, all of these slogans. And I tried to follow all of those directions, but I just couldn't stay sober. I couldn't not drink or use. And the next several years was just this this merry-go-round of relapse, rehab, repeat, relapse, rehab, repeat, always going back to AA, but never understanding why it wasn't working. And as I said in the beginning, you know, before I dove into my story, I thought I was doing, and I'm doing little air quotes right here, I thought I was doing Alcoholics Anonymous. All I was doing was showing up to meetings. But I didn't even know that I wasn't even doing the program. Like no one told me. No one told me there was more to AA than attending the meetings and like going to the diner before or after, which like, you know, was so hard to do in sober skin, you know, fellowship with people. But anyway, eventually I went through my last detox for that other form of alcohol. I got out. It never even occurred to me that it wasn't safe for me to drink alcohol once I kicked that other stuff. I am sure that someone along the way told me that, you know, because you have this, you know, this problem with drugs, you might also have a problem with alcohol. Might not be safe for you to drink as well. I'm sure someone told me that. I just don't remember, right? And so I went back to drinking, and I encountered the same problem I did when I was, you know, 17. I could not drink the way I wanted to drink, the way I absolutely had to drink without doing something to keep me up. So eventually the combination that I found was alcohol and the Breaking Bad form of alcohol. I did that for the next like 15 years, right? And in my mind, because I wasn't strung out and going through withdrawal, I thought this is such a better way of living, right? I knew it wasn't right, and I knew it wasn't good. And I knew it wasn't what people expected of me, but I thought it was an improvement, right? And back in 2016, I met a man and we got into a relationship and fell in love. And he drank alcohol, which was good because I was not looking to give up drinking. But he didn't do anything else. He'd never shot anything. He'd never snorted anything. He'd never done anything like that. And so I thought I was faced with two options. Either I could tell him that I do this other stuff to keep me up so I can drink the way I need to drink, and hope that he is accepting of that, or I could keep doing it and hide it from him, right? It never even occurred to me that the other option was to just try to put it down and just drink alcohol. And the reason that never occurred to me is because I know I can't drink successfully. Not that it was successfully, but I knew I couldn't drink like at all the way I needed to without doing this stuff to keep me up. So because I'm a coward, I decided to keep doing this other stuff behind his back. And I'm getting away with it for a while. And the longer I get away with it, the more full of fear I become, because I am convinced that, you know, he's going to find out and this relationship is going to end. I am in love with this person. And so I try my final experiment, which is to put this other stuff down and just drink alcohol. And it is the worst failure of all the experiments that I tried over the, you know, 2+ decades of drinking and whatnot. It is the worst failure. I'm right back, you know, I felt just as out of control as like those first couple times drinking when I was a teenager. The effect that alcohol had on me became like less and less predictable, meaning like I could drink the same amount that I normally drink and be waiting to get that sense of ease and comfort, right? And it's just not touching me, right? and then I'll drink the same exact amount of alcohol the next night, and somehow I'm passed out on the floor, just in a blackout, a mess. And I didn't like how it was starting to turn on me. All of a sudden, this thing that um, used to relieve my internal condition is so atrocious, right? And alcohol used to relieve some of that internal atrociousness. It used to relieve some of the fear. It used to give me ease and comfort. It used to relieve some of the anxiety. It used to relieve some of the doubt. It didn't ever erase it, but it numbed it um, just enough to make it bearable. And all of a sudden, this thing that used to be, the solution for all of that stuff started to exacerbate those things. Meaning, like, I would start to drink and I'd be more full of fear. I'd be more anxious. I'd be more uneasy. And so I would drink more to try and, get that sense of ease and comfort. And I just couldn't get it. Right. And I didn't know what to do. And I started to suspect that I might have a drinking problem. I had no idea that being an alcoholic wasn't on my radar yet at all. My idea of an alcoholic was someone living under a bridge, drinking out of a brown paper bag. I still had a roof over my head. I was still unemployable. I hadn't had a job in years, but I was in a relationship that I was like absolutely just destroying because of the way that I was. And this thing is so cunning, baffling, and powerful, and it's so tricky that it kept telling me that, like, if you were an alcoholic, someone would say something to you about your drinking, right? This man that you live with, that you love, that you want to spend the rest of your life with, he'd approach you, he'd say something, he'd be like, "Hey, I think you're an alcoholic," or he'd at least be like, "Hey, I think you need to like ease up on the drinking for like a week or so. Just like take a break. You don't need to, cut it out." But no one, again, like no one was talking to me about my drinking. And so I convinced myself that, like, if this was alcoholic drinking, someone would say something, right? And here's the other problem. Over the course of the years that I was in treatment for other forms of alcoholism, I'd gone to psychologists and psychiatrists, and I had been diagnosed with diagnoses like this long of different disorders that they decided that I suffered from, right? So it's clinical depression, PTSD, anxiety disorder, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar disorder. I had been medicated at various times throughout those years. The medication never helped. I always went back to self-medicating. And the problem with this is, at the tail end of my drinking, where all I'm doing is drinking alcohol, my untreated alcoholism, which I do not know that I have, right? It mirrors mental illness, which I've been diagnosed with all of this mental illness, right? A mile long. So I just keep telling myself, every time there's another blackout, every time I wake up with the pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization after a night of drinking, and I'm like, how could you have done this again? What is wrong with you? Well, you're just drinking because you're so depressed. You're drinking because you're anxious. And if you can get your mental health under control, you won't drink the way you drink, right? This is my thought process. And towards the end of my drinking, my fiance comes to me with an ultimatum. And the ultimatum isn't, "You got to stop drinking." The ultimatum is, he points to his head. He's like, "You need to get your effing head together or we're done." So that just reinforces this idea that I'm not drinking alcoholically. I just have all these mental health problems. That's the problem that he recognizes. That's the problem that I've been told, I've been told by doctors that I suffer from. That's what I need to address. Right. So, I'm trying to sort out what to do. And I remember feeling at the lowest that I've ever felt in my entire life. And the way that I feel was like this. I don't even know how to articulate it with words adequately. I've been in the grips of depression before. I have felt suicidal before. I have acted on suicidal thoughts before. The space that I existed in right before I wandered back to AA was someplace below feeling suicidal. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone in here. I did not have the desire to want to kill myself. I almost would have felt safer if I did, because I felt suicidal before. I know what that feels like. Like, it's not pleasant, it's not comfortable, and it sucks and it's scary, and I've acted on it before. But to feel even lower than that, and even darker than that, and even more hopeless than that, and not have the desire to want to end my life was scarier than anything I've ever experienced. And that's where I was. And I was sitting in front of the computer trying to figure out what to do with myself after this ultimatum of needing to get my head together. So the first thing I did was Google checking myself into the psych ward. And there was something, and I don't know what it was, that that told me that that wasn't it. Like that's not it. What you're suffering from isn't just psychiatric shit. If you were in a space where felt you needed to, put yourself into or for a 72-hour hold to be safe, you'd know it. Or if you didn't know it, someone else would know it and lock you up in the psych ward. But something nudged me to tell me that that wasn't all that I was suffering from. So the next thought is, this drinking is really problematic. Maybe you need to go to treatment. The thought that followed that was, I knew that I wasn't physically dependent on alcohol. When I was waking up in the morning, there were no shakes, there was no DTs. I wasn't going through any physical withdrawal, which I thought made me not alcoholic yet because I didn't know what I suffered from, right? Every day that I woke up and I drank, even in the morning, I thought I was choosing to drink. I thought I was making the choice to drink at 9 a.m. I knew what it felt like to be addicted to something where it demanded I put it in my body or I go through withdrawal. And I didn't have that experience with alcohol. I didn't know that I was still, powerless and had no choice every day that I drank. But when the thought came to check myself into treatment, the next thought was, well, you don't need to go to detox. There's no physical dependence. So the next thought is, maybe you just need to check yourself into inpatient and stay inpatient for a little bit. But I thought back to all of the years and all of the dozens of treatment facilities that I'd stayed in, long-term inpatient, anywhere from a week to 28 days plus. And I thought back to how successful those inpatient stays were. And it occurred to me, the only thing that they succeeded in doing was keeping me separated from the thing that I was putting into my body. As soon as, or sometimes while I was still in, there's not enough time to tell a story about when I broke out of treatment to go and get some stuff and then snuck back into treatment because I knew I wouldn't be able to stop if I stayed out. But all those treatment facilities did was keep me separated, physically separated, right? And I knew that as soon as I got released, I had no defense, none, right? And I was like, well, maybe you can do like a day program or whatever. And I was like, I did all of that. And all it did was like kind of keep me accountable until it didn't. Right. And the next thought that I had, and this was hard to hear, the noise inside of my head was deafening. It was just like 1,000 voices all at once, 1,000 emotions all at once. But amidst all that noise, there was like this clear thought. And it was I wish there was a group of people who understood how I was feeling, who understood how I was thinking, like the things I'm thinking, all this garbled, weird, bizarre thought, who I could talk to or who I could just listen to. Because honestly, I'm too terrified to even open my mouth and talk, right? And amidst all that other noise and other chatter, it was as if something reached into my brain and turned the volume dial down. And all of that noise just softened and quieted, right? And the next thing that came to me, and it was a voice, it was not in my voice, right? And it said, there is a place like that. It's called AA, you asshole. Go find a meeting, right? And I absolutely believe that was the spirit of the universe directing me back to the rooms where there were people who had a solution for what I suffered from. And not just had a solution for what I suffered from, but who could also explain the problem of alcoholism so that I could decide that I was an alcoholic and I needed to find a solution. So where I found myself right there in that moment, right, was at this jumping off point that they talk about, right? So I could not picture life without alcohol. I absolutely couldn't picture life without alcohol. I was not, even when I got that direction to go back to AA, the next thought wasn't, I'm never going to drink again. In fact, it was, I can't imagine never drinking again. Like, and even if I go back to AA and try to dry out for a little bit, I don't plan to quit forever. Like, I just don't. So I could not picture life without alcohol. Someday, and it was on that day, I was unable to imagine life either with alcohol or without it. And that's a really uncomfortable place to be, where I could not imagine never drinking again, but I could not imagine continuing to drink the way that I was drinking. And I knew deep down inside, I would never be able to control and enjoy it. Because I had been trying that for like 25 years, right? I knew loneliness as such few do. I was at the jumping off place. I wished for the end, right? So I wandered back to AA, and I go into a meeting room, and I sit through the meeting, and they tell me there's another meeting there in 2 days. So I go back, right? And I sit through that meeting. I raised my hand at the beginning to say I was a newcomer. So after the meeting ended, all these women descended upon me in a frenzy. It was so chaotic and hectic. It was a flashback to 20 years ago when I was, going to meetings every day, and they all scribbled their numbers down and said, call me, call me, call me, call me anytime. Call me if you think about drinking. Do 90 and 90, same old slogan, meeting makers make it, all of that stuff that I remembered from years ago. And after that group of women sort of like died down and, fizzled away, a woman who I'd seen from across the other side of the room slowly started to approach me. And she did something completely different, right? She asked me a few questions, like two or three. She asked me what my name was, right? She asked me if I'd ever been to AA before. She asked me if I'd ever had a sponsor and done the steps. And I gave her really, she wasn't grilling me, and she wasn't demanding really lengthy answers. She just asked some really brief questions about me. And then suddenly she stopped asking me anything about myself. And she started to talk about herself. And I'm like, who is this crazy woman? And why is she talking to me about herself? And what she did was she started to talk about the way that she felt and the way that she thought and the way that she drank. And I'm like, what is going on here? I was really baffled. I didn't know what was going on. But the more I listened to this woman's talk about how she used to think and feel and drink, in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, I feel that way right now. Like I think those things all the time. And I drink just like you used to drink, right? She started to tell me more and more, right? And then eventually she shifted from just telling me how she used to think and drink and feel, right? And she started to describe herself. She talked about how she was so baffled and she didn't know what was wrong with her. And then she started to describe herself as being an alcoholic. And there was this thing that went off in my head and I'm like, holy cow, if this woman is an alcoholic and she drinks and thinks and feels just like I do, maybe I'm already an alcoholic. Like now, like maybe I was like, I felt really kind of silly because I had thought that way and felt that way and drank that way for over 2 decades, right? And I'm waiting to wake up with the shakes before I declare myself as an alcoholic. I'm waiting to be under the bridge with the brown paper bag before I can confidently say I'm alcoholic. But here's a woman who drank just like me, who's describing herself as an alcoholic. And so I show up to AA thinking that you guys are going to diagnose me and tell me, yeah, Kat, you're an alcoholic. You belong here. You need to do this, that, and the other thing, and blah, blah, blah. You'll be on your way. Meeting makers make it 90 and 90, rah, rah, rah. And here, this woman has an entirely different approach. And I am hooked because the portrait that she painted when she described herself of how she used to live, how she used to feel, how she used to think, and how she used to drink did not line up with the woman who was standing in front of me with her head held high, full of dignity and grace. And I was like, what the F did you do to pull yourself from the pit of alcoholism that you describe yourself as living in to the woman that you are today? Like, I was curious. So rather than, feeling like someone was forcing, this sobriety thing on me, she had given me the best gift in the world, which was this most powerful first step experience, right? Or the beginning of a first step experience. She asked if I wanted to work together. I said yes. She gave me a big book. She asked me to read the doctor's opinion. We met in our living room, I think it might have been in our back porch because it was August. And we went over the doctor's opinion, right? And it blew my mind. I had access, for the first time in my life, access to information that I was never privy to. And here's a really important thing. Information alone, knowledge alone is not sufficient to prevent me from picking up a drink. But this stuff blew my mind. This part in the doctor's opinion where it's talking about the allergy. I'd never known about this, right? So my sponsor, this woman, she starts talking about how we're bodily different and mentally different. I was like, well, what does that mean? Right. And we read this paragraph, right? That the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is the manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. And once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and they become astonishingly difficult to solve. When we first read that part about an allergy, and I laughed out loud, I was like, Aubrey, there is no way that I am allergic to alcohol. I've literally put alcohol into my body almost every single day since, for 2 decades, right? I've put every other form of alcohol under the sun into my body in large quantities. There is no way I am allergic to this stuff. And she's like, Kat, I'm not talking about the kind of allergy where you eat strawberries and get a rash, or you eat some shrimp and your throat closes up. They're talking about an allergy as being an abnormal reaction. She's like, can you look back on your drinking and recognize even just one time where you reacted, your body reacted abnormally than the other people that you saw binge drinking, heavy drinking, problem drinking? And I look back and I realized all those, like, especially those tough guys that I was hanging out with that were drinking bottles of Jack and, doing all this other stuff. What I remember is if they decided that they were going to party for 3 days straight, and then after the third day, they had to go back to their shift at work or go back to their wife, whatever, they could make the decision to stop, to put the cap on the bottle, to close up the baggie and go back to whatever responsibility they had. I never had that power ever, not once. So when she presented me with this idea of the allergy, and that physically, once I put alcohol in any form into my body whatsoever, an allergy is activated, the phenomenon of craving is on me, and I will seek to continue to drink, to continue to get that ease and comfort, even when I'm beyond the point of enjoying the ease and comfort. My friend Pat, who's on here, she's talked about, one of the biggest moments of being aware that this physical allergy existed is drinking in a blackout. If I'm drinking in a blackout, I'm not aware of the ease and comfort the alcohol is giving me anymore, right? But my body is driven by this allergy, by this phenomenon of craving, to keep putting another drink, even though I'm not even conscious to be aware of the effects of the ease and comfort, right? And so it also kind of points towards, in this paragraph, part of the solution, or at least the solution for the physical allergy. The solution for the physical allergy is complete abstinence. Now, I thought when I was in treatment for other forms of alcohol, that my problem, that what made me an addict, right, was that I became physically addicted to a particular substance, right? I thought that what made me an addict was physical dependence and physical withdrawal. I had no idea that I didn't have to, experience any form of dependence or withdrawal to be a real alcoholic, right? But I subscribed to the solution of complete abstinence. The problem with the solution of abstinence for an alcoholic like me, who doesn't know she's an alcoholic, is that when I stay physically abstinent, and everyone starts to notice you've gained some weight, you've got your color back, you look better, you must feel better. As I mentioned before, my internal condition is so atrocious that when I try to stay, sober without a spiritual solution, I get worse. I don't get better. So that physical abstinence as being the only solution, I knew that didn't work. And Aubrey quickly, pointed me to this second part of this threefold disease, which is me being mentally different, right? And I was like, oh, I know that, bipolar, PTSD, major depression, all of this stuff. And she's like, we're not talking about your psych diagnosis. We're talking about your thinking, right? She's like, this disease centers in the mind. She's like, Kat, what would happen every single time you would get out of treatment, you'd string a couple of days together, maybe a couple of weeks together, right? What would happen eventually? And I was like, well, eventually I'd drink again. Eventually I'd pick up again, right? And I'd do all the crazy crap that I promised myself I wouldn't do. And she's like, let's circle back to that. What's the craziest thing you've ever done? And I started to rattle off crazy things I'd done while under the influence of alcohol or other forms of alcohol. She's like, the craziest thing you've ever done is, from a sober state, think that you could drink safely or successfully or differently the next time, and try that experiment one more time. So we started to talk about the condition of the mind, right? That without fail, every single time, without applying a spiritual solution, what happens to me is I either succumb to a crippling mental obsession, where the mental obsession is on me so hard and so heavy. And it's like there's this thing clawing up my back, and it's just like getting up towards my neck and my head. And it's like, sometimes it's sneaky and subtle at first, but eventually it's screaming and relentless, and I can't turn it off and I can't shut it up. And even though I know I'll burn my life to the ground, I pick up a drink, right? Sometimes it's a mental blank spot where I'm not even thinking about drinking, and out of nowhere, I'm at the bar ordering something, right? Sometimes it's the peculiar mental twist, where even though there are hundreds of instances of the pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization I would experience in the morning after waking up, having little to no recollection of what I did or said the night before after drinking, even though I have years of that, the peculiar mental twist will tell me, you don't want to hurt that person you love again. So this time when you start drinking, you'll do it differently. You won't drink so much. You won't say and do the things that will harm them. This time will be different. And without fail, every time I cross lines after lines after lines, I drink and I drink and I drink and I cause harm and I cause harm and I cause harm. Right. So I'm here and I was like, that's great. I have the physical thing. So abstinence. I had this mental thing. Well, what's the solution for that? And she's like, underneath this physical and mental, right, is this spiritual malady. And I'm like, oh my God, here comes the God stuff. Right. Here's the difference, right? Being at this jumping off place was a good thing, right? And then the other difference, right, when I showed up this time was that I said earlier that I was looking for a way out, right? I wasn't looking to stop drinking. I certainly wasn't looking to find God. I was looking for a way out. And what this woman presented me with is she's like, Kat, this is what I did, right? She's like, I tried every other experiment. I tried all the things that you've tried. Nothing worked. Nothing, nothing ever afforded me continuous sobriety, right? Nothing ever gave me freedom from this, right? And she's like, I came to AA and I got a sponsor and I did these steps as outlined in this big book, right? And I had this spiritual experience that, afforded me this freedom, right? That I don't find it necessary to pick up a drink. And I was like, you know what? I still wasn't convinced that it could work for me, but I was absolutely convinced that it had worked for her. And I knew she wasn't lying to me. Like I knew she wasn't trying to sell me a bill of goods. And she said to me, what do you have to lose? Like, say you try this, say we start reading this book and we start doing these steps and you drink again. She's like, what do you have to lose? You're probably going to drink again anyway. That was the other thing that it kind of let me off the hook. She's like, Kat, if you're a real alcoholic like me, it's not if you'll drink again, it's when you'll drink again, because you will. You're an alcoholic. It's what we do. Somehow that allowed me to not be so hard on myself, thinking that I could white knuckle my way out of this thing. Right? She told me the straight truth about exactly what I suffered from, and so we started to pursue this, and we got right into the steps as outlined in the book. And I started to have these really serious experiences. Right? There's this other part in A Vision for You where it says. He saw that he would have to face his problems squarely, that God might give him mastery, right? The last thing I wanted to do was hear about God, especially, all my old ideas of a God with a capital G, which just being so desperate and so hopeless allowed me to be open-minded enough and willing enough to just pursue this with abandon without having all that old baggage get in the way. But it says right here in the book that God might give me mastery, not 90 and 90, not my sponsor. When this book was written, there weren't 90 meetings to go to in 90 days. There weren't any meetings. There wasn't sponsorship in the way that it exists today. There was none of this. Before the book was written, there wasn't even the directions in the book. There was just one alcoholic helping another, right? And it worked for them. And they passed it along to still, more sick and suffering alcoholics. And so when she started to talk to me about the powerlessness, right? I had such a profound first step experience. And I didn't understand what it meant. Like it meant that I'm as powerless over alcohol, right? I am just as powerless when I am drinking alcohol, or as I'm just as powerless when I'm not drinking alcohol over alcohol as when I am drinking it. Meaning like I'm powerless over the thought and then I'm powerless when I put it in my body, right? And that little dash, and my life had become unmanageable. I had only ever examined all the unmanageability that came as a result of drinking the way I drank. I never thought for a moment how unmanageable my life was when I was not drinking, when I was little, before I discovered alcohol, all those in between times, in between rehab stints, when I was trying to stay sober. That was the real unmanageability. That unmanageability is what drove me back out to drink. So my life had become unmanageable. My life is unmanageable by me drinking or not drinking, period, right? And so when it started to be put in terms of, alcohol had not been my problem, alcohol had been my solution. And my problem, which it says right in the book, my problem is lack of power, right? So what's the solution to lack of power? The solution isn't just power, right? Because here's my problem. I show up here and there's this astonishing pile of shit that is blocking me off from this power that can save my life. So the solution for lack of power for me is access to power. And the way that I access power is the practical application of these steps in this book. And that's what we set off to do. And we didn't waste any time. And she didn't twist my arm, and she didn't rush me through anything, but we pursued it with the desperation of a drowning man, meaning like, if I didn't seek out the solution as ferociously as I sought out my next drink, I knew I would drink again. And I started to have an experience. And I know I only have a few minutes left. One of the most powerful experiences I had, and it really solidified this idea of a higher power, right? Because I thought I would show up to AA and you guys would teach me how to not drink. And I thought that maybe if I was lucky, I would never take another drink again. But I thought, or I assumed, that I would live with the obsession to want to drink every day for the rest of my life until I died. And I was willing to endure that if I could just figure out how to not drink and not hurt people anymore. And when those 10-step promises started to come to fruition, which, by the way, I wasn't even aware of because I was so emotionally not sober, and I was showing up to meetings crying about my relationship because I was causing harm left and right. And she's like, Kat, when's the last time you had a drink? And I was like, I'm not sure, like whenever before we started working together. And she's like, when's the last time you woke up with the obsession, where you had the obsession on you all day and all night to want to take a drink? And I'm like, I don't know. And she's like, when's the last time you had a passing thought of wanting to drink? And I'm like, holy cow, it was gone. It was gone. That obsession had been removed. And I know that I didn't do anything to remove it. I know that this woman hadn't reached into my brain and removed the mental obsession. It had been lifted. I was in a place of neutrality, safe and protected. It blew my effing mind. And in that moment, I knew that God existed, right? I had more than an inkling that God existed, because I felt it. And I saw it radiating out of this woman when she sat down to work with me and opened this book every time. But in that moment, when I knew that this obsession had been removed, I knew that a power so much bigger than myself had done that. And the thing that she said, she's like, I'm never going to ask you to do anything you don't want to do, or demand that you do anything you don't want to do, right, within AA. But the one thing I'm going to absolutely expect that you do once you've had an experience with all 12 steps as outlined in this big book is to pass your experience along to other sick and suffering alcoholics. And I said yes, because I was afraid to say no. But when it came time to do that, I felt totally unqualified and not prepared. And she's like, Kat, are you an alcoholic? Do you have, experience with being powerless over the drink, over the thinking? I was like, yeah. She's like, have you had an experience in Alcoholics Anonymous with these steps, with this book? And I was like, yeah. She's like, all you need with a newcomer to do is show up and tell the truth of your experience, and you cannot mess this up. You cannot mess this up if you show up and tell the truth of your experience, no matter how unqualified you feel. No matter how scary it is. And I have to say that sitting down, opening this book, looking into the eyes of another alcoholic, sharing the deepest, darkest, dingiest, dirtiest shit I have ever done in my entire life with a total stranger, and allowing that to give them a little bit of freedom to maybe share a little bit of stuff about themselves, to see the light come on in someone else's eye, the light that is so dim, it's like in danger of going out, has been one of the most rewarding experiences I have ever had in my life. I never thought that sobriety was something I would want. And then when I finally desired it, I didn't think it was something I could ever attain. And once I attained that physical sobriety, I didn't think freedom from the obsession would be a thing that would come to fruition. And then it did. And then all of a sudden, this big, brand new, wonderful life beyond my wildest dreams that my sponsor promised me I would have, I have. Like fourth dimension and beyond. It is so incredible. I want to thank all of you here. Without all of you, I'd be drunk or I'd be dead, but instead I'm here able to share my experience with you. So thank you so much.